Welcome back to the Darkest Theory podcast. I am ScrapBrain here with Subtle.
What's going on, everyone?
Hello, hello. So today we're going to be talking about the availability of information perks within Dead by Daylight, perks and add-ons for both the killer side and the survivor side. So information perks are a very critical piece of the game that a lot of people seem to kind of disregard in a large portion. And they're very important. On the killer side, they can allow you to get into chases faster to get pressure going for downs. And on the survivor side, it can help you loop to last longer for your teammates to do your other objectives. So it's a very critical piece of the game that I just don't think gets enough love. Any opening thoughts, Subtle?
Yeah, I mean, I think, info perks are definitely like a pretty common piece of a lot of my builds. Usually two or three, honestly, with maybe one slowdown, maybe one chase perk as well, depending on the killer. But I feel like a lot of the time, sometimes I'll feel like my builds don't have enough information, and a lot of the times the matches that I struggle are because I'm spending so much downtime between chases, not able to find other survivors and such. And that's usually what costs me. Usually, if I get to the end of the match and I maybe have fewer hooks than I would have thought, I'll look back and the chases will be like, okay, no one really looped me for any meaningful amount of time. So what caused me to not do as well? And usually that's the culprit more than anything else, is that I just look back and realize that I just couldn't get into those chases. And I think info does a really good job of that.
Yeah. So it seems like a lot of time on the killer side in particular, people will load up on slowdown perks, whether that's regression in the form of pain res or Pop Goes the Weasel or, back in the day, Ruin, any of these perks, Call of Brine. There's no shortage of slowdown perks, and people will run that. Uh, and they really do that at the cost of chase perks and, for today's discussion, information. Uh, the reason why slowdown is so prevalent is because the longer that you drag a game on as killer, the more opportunities you have to find the survivors, to down them and to form that pressure. But I think that, with extra chase perks, or again, for today's discussion with info perks, you can actually get the snowball going faster, and you don't need to elongate games if you're ending them sooner.
Yeah, and I think that like getting into chases and knowing where they are, I think there's like a lot of really neat things that you can do as killer where you can almost fake that you don't have the amount of information that you do. I'll do that a lot of the times, and we'll get to some perks that we'll give some specific examples, but seeing auras and pretending like you don't see them on the other side of an object or a wall, and they're choosing to stealth because they hear terror radius, haven't left scratch marks, and you're able to get a quick hit, almost in the same way that you might have as like a stealth killer, right? Where there's no terror radius and you sneak up on someone on a gen. And now you're cutting your amount of chase time to get that down in half, pretty much, if they're full health, or just getting a free down otherwise. So it is really, really useful if you can use your information the right way, especially, like I said, if you can kind of bait survivors into not realizing that you have the information that you do. So yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, and on the opposite side, the survivor meta is still kind of shaping up after the most recent patch, but um, you know, previously there weren't a ton of info perks on the survivor side. People were really focusing on like dead hard and other exhaustion perks and a lot of second chance perks. So, things like wiretap were going largely unnoticed. Even in a gen kick meta, we would still get lots of value off of that. Or, you can get a lot of information through kind of less obvious perks like distortion. You can kind of figure out what perks the killer is running. Uh, and so, similarly to what you were saying on the killer side, you can kind of feign a little bit on the survivor side to elongate chases where you have information that the killer doesn't think that you do.
Yeah, I think positioning as survivor is like probably one of the most overlooked things. I think when most people talk about survivor, it's like being efficient on generators, and then also like being like looping the killer. That's what most people talk about, is like that's the skill of the game, is looping the killer. But a lot of times being out of position is a big reason why your loops start off not as strong, or that you barely don't get through a window or to a pallet or something in time and not recognizing where they're coming from. And with the recent patch with the mid chapter, I feel like a lot of the discussion has moved to even more talks about how rough solo queue can be for survivors. And I do think that while solo queue is at a disadvantage because of the lack of information, I do think more survivors should be looking at finding even just one perk slot to kind of fit some sort of information in, so you're not flying blind so much in terms of knowing where your teammates are, knowing where objectives are, being able to find totems or something if they're running hexes, stuff like that. Knowing when your survivor teammates might be leading the killer in your direction, knowing when resources are being used, and different things like that. Like, there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of tailor your build to help you, even if you don't have comms. And sure, the survivor HUD improvements and stuff have definitely aided in that, and I think that might be why some survivors are maybe apprehensive to bring those perks in, just because they're like, well, I have enough information here, I can make do with that.
Right.
But I do think that there's like a lot of value in doing that, and maybe not relying, like, you can get that info on your own and not have to worry about teammates putting you necessarily in bad positions or being caught off guard. Whereas if like a Swift, you might be able to get away with it a little bit more.
Yeah, well, let's go ahead and jump into the perk and add-on discussion. You wanted to start with Bond. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll start with Bond. Anyone who's talked to me about Dead by Daylight Survivor knows that I love this perk. It's pretty straightforward. You see teammates within 36 meters of your position, and it's it sounds really simple, but the amount of information that you can get just knowing, like I said, like we were talking about, knowing when a survivor who is in chase now with the HUD always showing you is coming to your position, or knowing if there's an injured survivor nearby who might be stealthing trying to find an opportunity to heal, you can kind of just bring yourself to them and heal them and get them back in the game. I know in solo queue people will criticize their random teammates and stuff for being too stealthy, and when they're injured they might be hiding off to the side in corners, whatever it may be. But being able to have that information and go and help them out and make them get to a point where they're brave enough to kind of get back into the match, I think is really important. And it kind of overlaps with a couple of other perks, with empathy and aftercare doing similar things. With empathy only showing you injured survivors, but at a larger range. And aftercare, you have to interact with them altruistically in some way, whether it's unhooking or finishing a heal in one way or another. But it resets every time that you're hooked. So I think aftercare is really powerful, but has that pretty massive downside and requires some setup. And empathy's thing is, like, even though it shows you injured and has the wider range, I think outside of Bond's range, you probably don't care all that much about, a survivor who's injured in 70 meters away from you. Like, it does that information doesn't really help you. I think Bond gives you a nice like radius of, okay, this is kind of my zone, and I can kind of know exactly what's going on with my teammates at all times. And I think that has a lot of value, especially if you're looking for pallet saves, flashlight saves, stuff like that. I think it's really good to set you up for that.
And conversely, if you're running the killer and you have Bond on, then you can see where your teammates are that are working on objectives or that are healing or that is just injured, without anything else, and purposefully form your pathing in such a way that you can avoid them.
Yeah, definitely.
And then you can progress the game, or you can save your teammate from, going down and getting a hook state, stuff like that. Um, there's plenty of times in the end game where, we're trying to make our way out through the exit gate, but we need a body block, and just having that immediate visual representation of where your teammate is so that you can try and body block and take a hit. Um, you get that perfect information that even perfect comms can't give you.
Yeah, and not be the last thing you want to do is lead a killer right to your injured teammate on death hook, and kind of just get them tunneled out of the game essentially. So anything you can do to avoid that is really good. And I think Bond does an excellent job in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And Bond, is good in both solo queue and in Survive with Friends. for your saves, for leading the killer away from your teammates. That's going to be good in either role. But being able to pass on that information to your teammates, if maybe you're like in a 2 or a 3 stack, what your non survive with friends survivor teammates are doing can be very helpful. So it serves a dual purpose. Um, the first perk that I want to talk about is Fogwise, which I do think is much stronger in a survive with friends. So Fogwise, as you see, when you hit a great skill check on a generator, you see the killer's aura. And then if I'm working on a generator and progressing the game through objectives and somebody else is looping, I can say, hey, the killer is moonwalking. Hey, they're on this random teammate. They're at this location. I can feed that information on to the people that are in my Survive with Friends, but it can also tell me if the killer is coming to me and I need to leave the generator. That's a little more niche because it relies on specifically you hitting a great skill check as they're coming to you. But you get perfect information on where the killer is at all times that you can then pass on to your teammates. I don't think it's as good in solo queue. It's still a very solid perk, but it really shines in a Survive with Friends.
Yeah, and I think like on indoor maps, especially ones that have multiple floors, like RPD and Midwich, I think really stand out. The game as well, where it's just it shows you, terror radius can get a little confusing on those maps in particular. So knowing, especially on Midwich, I think that has limited ways to go up and down. Knowing that like even though the terror radius is very loud, but that they're a complete floor above you, it's like it's essentially like they're almost cross map. Unless
Right.
they're nurse, I guess. But other than that, you're in pretty good position, and it lets you stay and know, like you said, just the precise information is really strong for sure.
Right. The thing about all of these perks that we're going to talk about, particularly on the survivor side, is some people may point to Survive with Friends and the communication being too strong, but being able to visually see it is going to be infinitely better than any communication you can do verbally with your teammates.
Yeah, especially if you've played with Survivor with friends, and especially in our group, comms can get a little cluttered. So people will try and do
There
different
have
call
been a
outs, and
few times where we have just been singing songs over
yeah,
trying to get information.
but it's hard to precisely relay like what side of a window you might be on, what side of a pallet, especially if there's line of sight blockers. So like, being able to have aura reading that shows you where your teammates are, like I said, for flashlights and stuff, and if you want to get body blocks, everything, all of those kind of things, it really really helps in that regard. And I guess like the next perk that I was going to talk about in terms of helping teammates, and I think this one does actually really shine in solo queue, is Kindred, which when any of your teammates are on a hook, you see all of the teammates auras as well as the killer aura within a certain range of the hook. But I think even more importantly, when you're placed on a hook, um, you know, by default, you already see all of your teammates' auras when you're on a hook, but it shows all of your teammates, all of your other teammates' auras as well, in addition to that killer aura when they're within a certain range of the hook. So I think that's like one of the best sort of like self-preservation and tools that you can equip. I think in solo queue it might not help you in that like head to head with the killer, right, where it doesn't really help you in chase, but giving your teammates precise information on who's the closest, who's maybe trying to go in and help for an unhook where two people might need to go in so someone can body block for the other, knowing if the killer's camping, right, where Bubba comes to mind with putting you in basement. Trap killers as well, if you get put in basement or around a certain loop, and seeing trapper set things up, or hag, can give your teammates a little bit of a heads up. So I think Kindred is a really good way to make sure that you don't get left to struggle, or left and you lose like a free hook state in that regard. And I think the killer information in particular, and if you've ever combined it with open handed, you'll see what I'm talking about. But the range, the open handed also impacts the range of reading on the killer's aura from the hook, and they can go a pretty far ways away, which can help if they're looping. It almost works where you're almost like the gen in like a wiretap situation, which we'll talk about in a little while. But it's a really powerful tool for your teammates, which is sometimes what you need more than anything else.
Yeah. And like the killer HUD that got updated a while ago will help with that kind of, because you can see, oh, the tentacles are wiggling, so this person's in chase, and then this other person's on a gen, so maybe I need to go. But being able to see, oh, the two of us are on a gen, but this person is much closer, means that they should go, assuming they're both healthy or whatever. Um, and being able to see, oh, they actually are going, and how they're positioning, what their pathing is. The person who's getting chased can see where the other survivors are, kind of like what we were talking about with Bond, so that they can run the opposite direction from the person that's going for the rescue, stuff like that. It's extremely powerful, and like you were saying with open handed, you see the killer forever. It's ridiculous, especially like uh, for example on Midwich, if you get hooked in the courtyard, you just see the killer's aura for most of the map. It's pretty ridiculous. The next one that I want to talk about is Windows of Opportunity. This one is great in chase. So it can allow you to see, what tile you're approaching, whether it's, a short wall jungle gym or a long wall. You can tell based on the position of the pallet, the four walls. There's two positions on the four walls where the pallet can spawn, so you can see where the window is, where the pallet is. You can really path optimally while looping the killer, to maximize all of your looping chances that you can get. It has extra synergy with Lithe and Quick and Quiet, Dance with Me. You're able to really get extra value that you wouldn't normally be able to get. And on top of that, it also shows you if a pallet's already been thrown and it hasn't been broken, or if it's already been destroyed. You can see where breakable walls have been busted out, so the killer may have easier access to follow up. Windows is a great perk, and one that we saw a pretty big resurgence for a few months ago, and now it started to die off again. But I still think it's extremely strong.
Yeah, I think that there's kind of this like misconception about the perk where most people kind of view it as like a beginner friendly perk where it's like, oh, well, it shows you where palettes and windows are and only new players don't know where resources are, that kind of thing. And that's true in some ways. It can definitely help new players kind of get a feel of different maps, especially for the tiles that are consistent spawns and figuring out how pallets and windows and stuff are laid out on main buildings, things like that. But for experienced players and stuff like us and people who have played for a long time, there's plenty of map RNG, and if you're not in a full team and not able to know when resources and pallets and such have been used and broken already, like there's nothing worse than running to a tile and being like, oh, that's been used already. Like we say that pretty regularly. And so being able to have that heads up, and maybe, if you had a 50-50 decision of going to a tile to the right or to the left, and knowing that you're always going to pick the right direction is a really powerful thing in extending to the chase. That, survivors without resources, that's how you go down. So
Yeah,
it's
it's basically that meme of the bell curve where it's like at the low end, Windows of Opportunity is a noob only perk, and then
mhm.
at the high end, Windows of Opportunity is great, and then in the middle, it's like, oh, this perk is terrible.
Yeah, I do think it is actually like really, really good. Once you have more experience, and like people who are good loopers, all they need is a loop. And so if you're always going in the direction of one, it kind of helps you with the consistency and not being caught in a dead zone. My next one is kind of similar, kind of piggybacking off of Windows, is Any Means Necessary. Any Means got a pretty sizable buff recently where now it has no cooldown, which is sort of a twofold thing where it lets you reset the palette. You can reset a thrown palette that hasn't been broken, and that cooldown doesn't exist. But it also shows you the auras map wide of any palettes that are in the thrown position and haven't been broken. So now that it doesn't have a cooldown, you always have the aura reading as well. So you can kind of see if you're paying attention while maybe you're on a generator and a teammate's in chase. You can see the pallets when they've been thrown. You can see whether they're broken or not, and it kind of meshes the pros of alert in that way, where it's like it kind of shows you where pallets are being kicked as they're going along, while also giving you the windows where it's like, oh, I can see where a pallet, if you're not running windows and you're just running Any Means, the pallets that haven't been broken but are thrown, you can still kind of direct yourself. And also, if you can keep a running log, you will know like what general areas of the map maybe that resources and stuff have been used up already, and try to avoid that in future chases.
Yeah, it can give you a good idea of what areas of the map have become dead zones by pellets being thrown and broken. There are some non-info uses for any means necessary also. I don't want to focus too much on them because that's not the point of this episode, but it allows you to kill a bunch of zombies against Nemesis. If you blinded a pallet, a lot of times people will do a slow vault to push the killer away and then fast vault back while they're in the blind recovery animation to just give some extra time. You can fake that by using any means because it makes it sound similar to the slow vault. Pretty niche, but there are additional things that you can do as well. But yeah, having the information of knowing what areas of the map are potential dead zones, similar to Windows of Opportunity, but entirely map wide, can really help you plan out your route if you ever go into the chase. Uh, Moving on, we're going to talk about wiretap, which is uh, different in terms of the information that you get. This is great if you are wanting to loop at a particular tile and just know exactly where the killer is. The range is pretty large, but if you are looping at, like, let's say a TL wall where there's a generator, it's been wiretapped, and you just have wall hacks for the entire chase. You can tell if the killer is cutting through the middle or is waiting at the end of the wall and doubling back or waiting for your vault, or you just have full information on what the killer is doing. It gives you the perfect read to know what path to take. You can pair it up with something like Repressed Alliance to make sure that they can't even kick it, and you just have that information for the duration of the Repressed Alliance, regardless of what the killer does. I mean, you can just stay at a particular tile forever, and if they end up waiting at the end of the wall, hoping for kind of a double back or something like that, you have the option of just leaving the tile completely and knowing that they're still there.
Yeah, I think it's really good and kind of similar to what I was talking about with Fogways, where like the 2-story maps kind of let you set up for teammates and stuff as well, right? Like if you know that a teammate is on, you're working on a gen on the first floor, they're right above you, you can just pop a wiretap and give them the wall hacks as well and stuff, and it's really really good in a lot of ways. And like you said, just that tiles, having precise info, never having to worry about like tracking the red stain and stuff like that, or any sort of other mind games that killers might do, is a really powerful tool. And kind of moving on to Object of Obsession, which is it used to be a really strong perk that not many people would run. Now I feel like it's a perk that it's just almost never run. I know that I talked about it on a previous episode in one of the build spotlights and stuff that we did, but it basically, every time that your aura would be read by the killer, you see their aura back, and the killer doesn't know that you see them back either. And so it also has a passive where when you're the obsession, that every 30 seconds you'll see like a timer over the perk the killer sees your aura, which triggers that ability of seeing them back. So you just see each other for a couple of seconds every 30 seconds.
It's the
But
Spider-Man meme.
yeah, exactly. But the really powerful tool, besides just the aura reading of knowing the killer's position, which is obviously very strong, is like you mentioned with distortion earlier. You can start immediately tracking what the killer's build is, which is a really, really important thing to figure out, especially if you're trying to understand what might be waiting you in endgame. There's plenty of really strong endgame no-ed and no way out and things like that. So being able to start a match, right, where Lethal Pursuer is an extremely common one, where they just see your aura at the beginning, but you see them back, so you can know exactly what direction they're heading and maybe try and steer clear.
And you can see which killer it is, which
Yeah,
is very important.
exactly.
Also.
Yeah, being able to know exactly which killer it is right off the bat, even if they don't maybe have like those map wide like jigsaw boxes, or you see a bear trap, things like that, is really really strong. And being able to piece together exactly what perks that you're up against in addition to which killer it is, I think is a really really strong tool, especially in a meta that's pretty most people, there's a pretty fair amount of Lethal Pursuer that you'll go against, so you get the info from Object really quickly.
Yeah, I don't have as much experience with Object, but I mean the info is great when you're having your aura read. You also get that speed boost, which is a nice benefit. But yeah, the information that you can gain, knowing what killer it is if they have lethal, is amazing.
Yeah.
It can tell you, if you see an Oni off in the distance, and they're heading toward you, hey, I need to, head to this tile and play it safe and throw pallets early on. But if you see a ghost face, maybe you say, hey, I need to make sure that I'm not out in the open. It can really define how your game plan goes for the entire rest of the match. And being able to check, you know, I have more experience with distortion, but the principle is the same. And being able to figure out what their entire build is, and then knowing what you don't have to play against later on is invaluable. It's very strong.
Hmm. Definitely.
The next one that I want to talk about is a combination of Detective's Hunch with a map. I think that Detective's Hunch in general is a fine perk, but it really goes next level when you have a map, and it goes even next level when you have the add-on for the map that your teammates can see the same things that you have marked on your map. So, uh, if you have teammates that have boons, or maybe newer players that aren't really familiar with where gens are, or an indoor map where finding gens can sometimes be difficult, knowing where hooks are for saboteur players, you can gain a ton of information each time that a generator is or a generator is repaired. Being able to find totems for inner strength or inner healing, sorry, uh, like there's so much utility that you can get for the map and the layout to help your entire team. And I really think that if you want to run something that's really a heavy support build for your team, Detective's Hunch in a map is a pretty great way to go.
Yeah, and I think that like in particular, right, like I think totems kind of stand out as like the hardest thing to sort of find for survivors, and especially like they're random, and maps have like weird different RNG spawns that can really make it problematic if a killer gets a hex build going, and being
Mhm.
able to show that both for yourself but also to your teammates to help deal with maybe some plaything pentimento, to prevent that from getting out of control if you're trying to worry about stuff like devour and undying, things like that that can really snowball very quickly, I think is a really really useful tool. And also just showing generators and stuff on, especially on indoor maps, I think is really really useful, that where those maps are a little bit trickier to track different things.
Yeah, in particular, talking about totem spawns, the swamp maps, in particular, Pale Rose, because Grim Pantry has the two spots by on either side of Shack that are guaranteed totem spawns, but all of the rest can spawn really anywhere on the map, and they're quite large, and they can be on the edges of the map, and it can be hard to find. And with the map also, you get some extra benefit, especially if you have a pink map, the ultra rare, of being able to track trappers' traps. Um, and I don't know if it still can track hag traps.
I'm not sure with some of the recent changes. I'm not entirely certain, but
Yeah, but the trapper traps, even though trapper isn't a very frequently played killer, like it does a lot of work against him.
yeah, definitely. And yeah, I guess if you want, oh, I was going to talk about the end game like kind of combination of No One Left Behind, which I think has some pretty uncommon, like it was a perk that was changed not too long ago, um, where it shows you the auras of every other teammate once all of the generators are finished. And in an end game situation where a lot of times you're trying to get teammates and stuff off the hook and figure out exactly who's working on a gate and where, I think is really useful. And kind of piggybacking off of that, wake up is also really really useful, and being able to um, see where the gates are. Sometimes you're kind of in in a messy situation, right as the last gen pops, and don't have a good chance, or maybe just don't remember, to kind of look around and figure out exactly where the gates are. And then also being able to show your teammates what gate is being worked on, when it's being worked on and stuff, and opening it faster. I think that information and being able to help your teammates is really useful. And just permanent aura reading from No One Left Behind is a really really strong thing at probably the most important time of the game, which is trying to get everyone out.
Yeah, Wake Up in particular, I think, is pretty solid in solo queue, because you can see with the HUD that a generator is being worked on, but you don't know which one. And sometimes knowing which one to go to if you're in chase is absolutely the difference maker. Uh, and even in a survive with friends, I think that it's less useful by a considerable amount. But there have been plenty of times where, I've been in a chase when the last generator pops, and I'm having to dedicate all of my focus to looping, and I don't remember where the gates were at the time that they showed because I wasn't watching for it. All of my focus was dedicated to that, and then being able to see, you know, hey, now I've got like a half second to think about it, or I got hit. And I'm just taking distance. Now I can scan to see where the gate is that's being worked on, and I can head in that direction. Is absolutely something that can make the difference between an escape and a death.
Yeah, and a lot of maps have other ways of like being able to see generally where gates are because of the outdoor maps. You can kind of see like some of the high rise edge of map buildings and stuff kind of give it away. But the one that like jumps to mind is like Larry's, right? Like because Midwich has the guaranteed spawns, RPD has like the depending on which wing you're on, the guaranteed front, and then one of the two back ones, and uh, the game also has the two like same sides that from opposite from one another. But Larry's is really really difficult to like. You don't really have a good way of figuring out exactly where the gates are because they change, and there's so many line of sight blockers. So that's a map that definitely gives you a lot of value for sure.
Yeah. The last one that we want to talk about on the survivor side is actually an add-on strictly. That's the Blood Amber for the keys. Uh, there are add-ons for the keys that can help with aura reads for your teammates also, but I want to focus specifically on the Blood Amber. This is going to be similar to Wiretap, although this only works for yourself. So, like Subtle was talking about, being able to throw on a Wiretap on Midwich to help your teammate that's above or below you to be able to see where the killer is. This one is only for yourself, but you get to choose when it's active. It's not dependent on a generator or anything like that. You can just channel it when you need to, and you have total aura reading, total wall hacks for where the killer is. Similar to Wiretap, you can see at a loop what the killer's doing if they're trying to mind game or something. You can leave the loop if you need, and you actually can get a lot of time out of it. If you have the ultra rare key, you can have some additional time on your key. You can run things like built to last or streetwise to really augment it. You can get a lot of time of aura reading, which can make you just straight up win chases.
Yeah, and I think like especially at the beginning of chases, right, where the terror, like just at the start of it, where the killer's sort of approaching, maybe you're hiding on the other side of a window or something like that, trying to figure out what side the killer is coming from, knowing exactly what position you want to be at, which maybe doorway or you want to be leaning towards to try to exit. Maybe if you're like in shack or something, is really really useful in situations where your line of sight is blocked and that can definitely make a huge difference in being able to maybe not waste the pallet as soon as you might be it might otherwise. It's really it's a great tool in chase for sure.
Yeah. So that's going to be it for the survivor side of things. We're going to move on to the killer side, and I want to start off with Lethal Pursuer. So we were talking about this earlier. Lethal Pursuer is a very heavily run perk on the killer side, and for good reason. Uh, a couple weeks ago when I was talking about my demo build, we were talking about the difference between Lethal Pursuer and Corrupt Intervention. And Lethal Pursuer just lets you start snowballing, starting the pressure immediately. You know exactly where all of the survivors are outside of them running distortion. Um, and this is a group of three. I might want to focus on them. And then there's this other one off to the side. So I might want to head this direction to start being able to pressure multiple survivors at the same time. You can run it on Pinhead to be able to know where the position is to start heading towards the box to start the pressure that way. In addition to all that, all of the perks and add-ons and powers that deal with information that deals with aura reading, you get extra value when running lethal off of that. It's a premier information perk for killer.
Yeah, I mean, just being I've heard other killer mains and content creators sort of talk about it, where right that the beginning of the game is when the killer is at their absolute weakest compared to the survivors. The survivors have all of their health states, all their numbers, every resource has not been used yet, and they have the entire range of the map where all of the generators up, so they have a lot of area to cover in terms of trying to find and pressure survivors. So being able to just get in a chase right away, not to mention that the synergy it has with extending other aura reading abilities is just it's a really really good beginning of the game perk to just get the ball rolling. And it's definitely there's a reason why it's one of the most meta information perks for sure for the killer side. And kind of going off that, um, with lockers, right? Where lockers are a thing that can prevent your aura from being read, or reading other auras if you're inside the locker. So a couple of perks that interact with lockers and are important to me as someone who plays Huntress is Iron Maiden and Darkness Revealed. Iron Maiden being where if someone exits a locker, they scream and reveal their position for a few seconds. And then Darkness Revealed, every time that you open a locker, you see the auras of any survivor who is near any locker on the map for several seconds. And it's a really useful kind of sort of combination, especially if you're running something else like barbecue that maybe see someone across the map. An old school sort of way of dealing with barbecue, if you were outside of the range, was you go in a locker to hide your aura for those few seconds when barbecue is active, and then you exit. So Iron Maiden is a really really good counter to that. It kind of guarantees that you see the position of someone no matter what. And then Darkness Revealed for any of the really locker heavy killers like Trickster or Huntress. Super super strong information. You're going into lockers anyway, so you might as well get some information for your trouble. And I think that all those sort of perks sort of synergize really well together for sure.
Yeah, and like we've been focusing a lot on aura reading for these information perks, but you know, Iron Maiden is a very reasonable option for information. Like, not only do you get the faster reload times for your Huntress, not only do you get them exposed for a while, but the scream for the positioning is very relevant, knowing where somebody is who was trying to dodge barbecue, like you were saying, or somebody who was trying to, I mean, very niche, trying to dodge a Doctor Static Blast. It is a thing that can be done, but I don't know that I would ever dedicate an Iron Maiden slot to to running it on Doctor. But these knowing, okay, this person is here, they are near an unhook, so they're probably going to go get it. Maybe I can go and intercept them, or they're across the map, so I know where they are, so I can focus on these other people and apply pressure that way. Aura reading isn't the only way of getting information, but it's not to be discounted by any means.
Yeah, and I think something I just thought of with Iron Maiden, right, is like piggybacking off of the mid chapter, is that with the meta shift and some of the nerfs to medkits, if it hasn't happened already in your matches, it probably will down the road as more people move from medkits as a way of self healing to inner healing and going into lockers and stuff to heal. Iron Maiden not only tells you that they're exiting the locker after healing, but the exposed status effect, if you can get the hit within the 30 seconds, is an entire counter by exposing them and making them one shot anyway. So sure, they get the heal off, but they basically don't have the heal unless they survive for 30 seconds. It's a really powerful, I think, against a perk that I think is going to become more meta as time goes on with these healing changes, and maybe people don't feel as great about running med kits and stuff.
And when I was talking about Blood Amber, I was mentioning built to last against, any built to last, whether it's the Blood Amber or more commonly something like Commodious Toolbox for a hyper focus build, or a med kit because they got nerfed and people want to get more value out of their med kit. That's the same deal. If you're running built to last, you're gonna know when they leave the locker. Or flashbang is another great
Flashbang.
example.
Yep.
If somebody's trying to use built to last, flashbang, inner healing, you're gonna know where they are when they exit the locker, and they're gonna be exposed for that time, and that can add a lot of pressure and give you that information that you need to be able to apply that pressure.
Yeah, and I will just add on quickly, like if you run Iron Maiden, even on killers that don't usually interact with them, you'd be surprised how many times people actually go in lockers that you just are never aware of. Otherwise, if they're near hiding near a generator, most people think of going into lockers for stealth as like the noob play, but it's kind of, people try to metagame it a little bit of like, well, it's such a bad idea that they'll never expect me to go into the locker, and you'd be surprised how many times like randomly you're just like, why was there someone in a locker? But there's a lot of those perks that we were talking about that people run, and you just never think. I mean, every time that someone's making a flashbang, to know exactly where they are and possibly get a free down is really really game changing.
Yeah, hiding in a locker is like that meme with the bell.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
mean, we're gonna post both of them in the episode.
Yeah, for sure.
The next one I want to talk about is surveillance. Surveillance used to see a decent amount of play back when Ruin was at 200%. I still think that the perk can be pretty solid. I think that it has pretty good synergy with something like Oppression, where you're able to make multiple gens regress at the same time, and then knowing when that generator is being worked on. So when a generator is regressing, it will be white, and then when it gets worked on again, it will change to yellow. So you have immediate information not only on which gens got affected by the oppression, if they either weren't being worked on or if they got let go or something like that. And then when they go yellow again, you'll know a survivor is there working on it. So it can give you a lot of information. Um, as we move kind of further away from the gen kick meta with Oppression, Call of Brine, uh, or sorry, not Oppression, Eruption, Call of Brine, and Overcharge getting nerfed, I think this has less application for the Oppression, but I still think that the combination is very solid and can give you a lot of information on where survivors are.
Yeah, and the information somewhat overlaps with the information that Call of Brine can generate, but at the same time, like, especially if you're going against better players that are going to hit those great skill checks more often to get around the Call of Brine notification, surveillance still gives you that information, so it's going to more consistently let you know when generators are still regressing or when someone's hopped on or hopped off of the respective generators. And obviously, if you're still running Ruin, it still gives you that pretty good value, which some killers I think are still running.
And nichely, if the survivor is running like the hyper focus stakeout build, then those, even if they're not the best player, those goods that they hit will be turned into great, so you wouldn't get the notification from Call of Brine. But yeah, there is a lot of overlap with Call of Brine for sure.
Yeah, and the other one is kind of it's a perk that I really don't see all that often, which is Spies from the Shadows. So this is a very really unique perk that has existed basically since the game came out, which is that and it's not a teachable, which is that anytime that you're within a certain range and a crow gets disturbed, one of the crows that just kind of lay on the map that don't really have any other uses otherwise than when they fly away, is that it gives you a noise notification as if like a skill check was missed on a generator or on a heal or something. So it has a few seconds of cooldown, but it can actually kind of give you like random pieces of information as survivors maybe try to stealth and slow walk around a corner or something. It's particularly nice on indoor maps as well. And it's a perk actually that I use a lot when I play Dredge. I think that he's really good at it, it's particularly to kind of just see a crow and be like, okay, I'm going to just teleport to the nearest locker. Is really useful. I think Spirit does a really good job of utilizing it as well, since you can see it even while you're in phase, which is like a really strong tool because in phase you can't see auras. So I think there are some killers that it's really good on, and it's such a bizarre. It works around stuff like distortion, which I think is fairly common that survivors run because it's not an aura read. So it's usually like a really unique way to find survivors that they pretty much will never see coming. They're just never really looking out for it.
And the only thing that really counters it is Calm Spirit, which got a buff, but really a nerf. It sees no play.
Yeah.
And there have been times where, I remember vividly I was playing against Deathslinger on one of the swamp maps, and I had this slinger fooled. I used a pebble and I threw it at one of the gates, and then I got on the other gate, and he found me immediately because of Spies from the Shadows. It's a very underrated perk, and I think that the information that it gives is very strong because, like you said, it can't be stopped by anything except
Well,
for Calm Spirit, which doesn't see any play.
right. Yeah, it's just gonna work pretty much all the time. If someone's got Calm Spirit and counters your spies from the shadows, I apologize in advance if that screws you over.
The next one that we want to talk about is Nowhere to Hide, which is another very meta perk. It is seeing less play since the Gen Kick perks got nerfed, but I still think that it's a very premier information tool. Uh, the aura reading that you get is a pretty good sized range, and there are so many instances where I'm heading towards a generator and the survivor hears my aura and just like goes around the corner of the T wall, or will move on the other side of the long wall to try and avoid detection. And I kick the gen, and I just know exactly where they are, and they're crouching on the other side of the window. And just being able to know exactly where they are for something that I might want to do anyway, that I might be getting extra benefit out of with no cooldown, with a good range, is very strong.
Yeah, it's a perk that just like synergizes super well with a lot of strong perks. Obviously, the gen kicks, like you said, were nerfed, but I think are still plenty viable. Perk synergy is something that is pretty underrated. So I think that it fits in nicely to a lot of builds, and I think especially on instant down killers, where people might be trying to stealth and chainsaw killers, things like that. Being able to know exactly where they are, and in addition, killers with a lot of mobility, since the aura reading follows where the killer's position is, not the generator. Being able to kick a generator and then kind of just book it and have that aura reading sort of follow you with things like Nurse, Blight, Oni when he's in power, things like that is a really strong effect for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of moving on to my killer perk is Whispers. Really part of my staple build pretty much on every single killer for a long time, up until more recently, where I've kind of gravitated toward lethal a little bit more.
Yeah, just real quick to interrupt. Literally 100% of his killers had whispers on.
For no exaggeration, for a very long time, every single killer had a build of my last two perk slots I just kept as Whispers and Barbecue, and then I would just change up the first two because it was a combination that I just like fell in love with on literally every killer. Whispers is one of the simplest perk descriptions in the game, which is if there is a survivor within 32 meters of you, it lights up and you hear sort of like entity whispers in your ear. And if that status changes and no survivors are within 32 meters, the light turns off and you no longer hear the noises. That goes for survivors in any state, whether they're on the hook, whether they're slugged, in a locker or not, doesn't matter. You will get that info. It doesn't tell you how many or anything, but it's a 32-meter radius. It's not the easiest perk to pick up, I will admit, because it doesn't just give you the exact positioning for free. But if you're pretty good with like spatial awareness and understanding like what that means in terms of like a 32-meter terror radius, and kind of can picture a circle that you're sort of entering into someone's when it's off. Think about all the time we were talking about efficiency and stuff with information perks and how big of a difference it can make. If you're approaching a generator all the way in a far corner and you can kind of get used to what 32 meters feels like in terms of how close you are to the generator, you don't even have to go all the way to a generator to effectively check out whether there's a survivor working on it or not, which is insanely powerful. You're not just saving the distance going there, but you're also saving the distance back. You can just immediately turn and keep patrolling generators. I think killers that have really good mobility, again, I used to run this on Hillbilly a ton, where you can just chainsaw sprint across the map and sort of just like pass by a generator and then keep going. And it's like, oh, it Whispers turned on. Okay, I guess this is my stop. This is where I get off, essentially. And it's just like, all right, now it's time to chase someone. It has like a lot of different applications, right? Like early game when you can kind of use it as a less immediate version of lethal, but gets that snowball started where you just, like I said, keep going to generators. When it lights up, you know that's where someone's at. Mid game, if you sort of lose that snowball and can't really find anyone, it lets you immediately get back into the flow of chases. And I think end game in particular, especially in situations where you've closed hatch and you're trying to guard to two gates, being able to, it kind of works with No Way Out, where it's an unlosable situation for you pretty much, where if you go near a gate and Whispers turns on, you just stay at that gate. You don't even have to look for the survivor if you don't want to. You can just hover in that area, and if it turns off, then you can move and try to go. But once you're in that area and you know that they're there, a lot of survivors expect you to start having to patrol back and forth between the two gates, and you just don't have to worry about that mind game at all.
And it's similar to spies where nothing counters it. I mean, less counters whispers than counters spies.
Yeah.
Like calm spirit doesn't do anything. Nothing will stop whispers from activating it. It is uh more ambiguous information, but it is guaranteed information. The one downside that I'll say about whispers, you were talking about it being like a circle of 32 meters around you. It's actually a sphere. And so on those two-story levels that we were talking about, like Midwich or RPD or something like that, uh, it can kind of muddy up, is somebody actually here or are they above me? But again, it is guaranteed information, and I've run whispers a decent amount, and that in-game scenario, like you were talking about, is such a good feeling. I talked a while ago about my doctor build running whispers. It's phenomenal to guarantee that you're getting static blasts on people. I really like it on Pig when you're running uh,
Monitor.
monitor and abuse. Yeah,
Yeah.
because you're able to approach somebody, whispers turns on. They haven't heard your terror radius yet. You're able to crouch and sneak up right on them to pretty much guarantee a hit. Whispers is a fantastic perk. It's very good.
Yeah, I agree.
It's your baby.
Yeah, for sure.
The last one that I'm going to talk about is a combination of two add-ons. For the Demogorgon, the Lypros Lichen, and for the Plague, the Black Incense. So with the Lypros Lichen, when you teleport through the underground with Demogorgon, you see the aura of all of the survivors once you pop out for a period of time. And with the Black Incense, when the survivors are fully infected and they puke, then you see their aura for a set period of time. Both of those just are super guaranteed value outside of the survivor being like in a locker for the Lypros Lichen or cleansing, which you kind of are okay with them cleansing against Plague anyway, because you're then able to get your power more frequently. They gain immense benefit from Lethal Pursuer. If I'm, as a demo player, if I run Lypros Lichen, I am always running Lethal Pursuer. I want to be teleporting to generators to patrol them, to be kicking survivors off of them, and having that information on where exactly they are and where to chase is invaluable. And you can get that information so reliably and just consistently and constantly.
Yeah, I think both of those kind of fill like a similar role, where it's a really strong, very specific aura reading like positioning, where you just get to know where survivors are while just sort of using your power organically, or in Plague's case, it's just passively is doing it. You don't even have to worry about it. It's just like, oh, okay, now I get this info, which is like a great feeling. And kind of off of that is also another killer add-on, which is for Huntress, which is the glowing concoction, which is that you get aura reading every time that you hit a survivor with a hatchet. You get to continue seeing their aura for several seconds, which also again it gets extended by something like Lethal Pursuer. I think it's a really good add-on if you can go for longer range shots. It allows you to basically continue to get hits through stuff like Corn on some of the Coldwind maps, which is one of the hardest realms, I think, for Huntress to deal with. And also kind of lets you understand where the survivor might be headed. So if you get a hit and then they run behind a structure, you can almost say they run around the outside of shack or something and take a lot of distance. You can kind of like move parallel to them and kind of just move sideways with them at a range. And unless they have something like distortion or object, they're not going to know that you have the add-on anyway, and have that information at times. So it's a really powerful tool for getting quick downs, especially at a distance. At close range, it's pretty nice, especially sometimes survivors will kind of run up to you, and maybe crouch, try to like get right in your face if you're trying to go for a hatchet at close range. and then they get the hit, lose the collision, and sometimes it can be tough to know exactly where they run off to, uh, especially if you're inside of a maze tile. So being able to have precise info on where they're headed, sort of like I'm all ears, where someone takes a vault, you lose sight of them, and being able to continue tracking them is really really useful.
Yeah, and there are also situations where you can hit a hatchet with glowing concoction, and they, move a little distance behind a wall or something, and then they crouch down in the heal animation, and then not only are they still there, but then somebody else is there healing them too,
Hmm.
and so you get more information, similar to nurses calling, because then both of those survivors are there.
Yeah, definitely.
The last thing we want to go over is just like killers in general, whose like powers have information components. Some of them are more, some of them are less. Just some real quick ones. Legion can gain the killer instinct after getting the first hit on somebody in their feral frenzy. Plague can get information from the HUD seeing, hey, I puked on this generator and now somebody is infected, so uh, they can get information on what the survivor is doing in that case. Nemesis can get it. You've been playing a lot of Nemesis. Do you want to go over some of the information that you can get
Sure. Yeah,
from him?
he's got kind of a combination of seeing the killer instinct when someone uses one of the vaccines and stuff to cleanse from the infection. But the thing that you kind of have to get used to, it's pretty straightforward, but the zombies have the two states where they're on their normal patrol with their arms sort of at their sides, and then when they detect a survivor, they'll have both of their arms directly out in front of them and be walking in a specific direction toward the survivor that they detect. So that can give you just kind of random information, and allow you to kind of, you can see that a zombie is got their arms extended near a generator across the map and be like, okay, now I know that someone's on that generator where you wouldn't know otherwise. It kind of frees up, I think, for killers that get this information. It frees up some of those slots that you might need on some of the other killers to devote those info perks to.
Yes. Similarly, for Wesker, when somebody uses the vaccine for Nemesis, or the spray for Wesker, same thing with Plague. If somebody cleanses, all of those situations, you can tell when they interact with your power where the survivor is, either by the killer instinct for the Resident Evil killers, or by fountain lighting up for Plague. With Demogorgon, when you're holding your shred, you can see if somebody is working on trying to cleanse a portal. Uh, with Onryo, uh, you can see if somebody's holding a tape, because the background of their character will have the
Sort of static looking thing.
yeah, the static behind it. Also, if you teleport to a TV, if you project there, if a survivor is nearby, you'll give them a condemn stack. A TV will be off if not off, but there won't be anything on the TV if there is not a survivor within 16 meters. But if there is a survivor within 16 meters, the TV will actually have something on it. So she actually can gain quite a bit of information just through her power.
Yeah, and if you can track, like if you can pay attention to when, where the positioning of different TVs are and see that the aura goes away, that's usually getting turned off because someone's grabbing a tape. So not only do you see what survivor grabbed the tape, but if you're really good at understanding where the 7 TVs are, you can also gain info on like generally where someone just acquired the tape and start pressuring them and different things of that nature.
Yeah, and on top of that, if you know where a tape is taken from, you not know where their deposit point is, but you have a fairly good idea. You can usually narrow it down to like two or three
Yeah, you
locations
definitely
where
know
they're
where
trying to
it's not.
deposit it.
It's not going to be at the same TV, so you can, a big thing for Onryo is that while even though they're in chase, they're not getting the condemned gain over time for holding the tape. You can still sort of funnel them into your other turned on TVs and sort of like just start giving them stacks that way and prevent them from making their way back to the TV that they need.
Yeah. There are several other killers that have minor information gains, but uh, we really wanted to end with the two top killers whose just their power really leans heavily onto information.
Yeah, so I'll start with the newest killer, which is Skull Merchant, right? Which is the killer that's kind of built around info, putting down the drones, and kind of using her radar to follow survivors' positioning when they're just sitting inside of a drone's range, or whether they've disabled one of the drones and have that claw trap stuck to them for a certain amount of time. So being able to just the general play style, right, is just using the drones to sort of guard near objectives. Survivors generally don't want to get exposed and don't want to be affected by what other add-ons might be uh, being used that give you different status effects like oblivious and different things of that nature for being inside the drone's range. So they disarm the drone, and now not only do you get the haste, which is the kind of the larger buff that they sort of gave her, but being able to follow exactly where they are, and also getting the killer instinct on people who are just sitting in the drone, getting the exposed from the lock on is really really strong, and it allows her to take chases in like an advantageous way, like knowing where someone might be. Like you don't want to take chases in strong main buildings or necessarily around shack if the survivors sort of position correctly. So knowing where people, it prevents them from being stealth, and she doesn't really ever have a lot of downtime where she doesn't know what's going on in a match. And I think that like allows her to really excel at applying like consistent pressure to the objectives and to the survivors.
Yeah, and she's got that iridescent add-on where everybody starts the trial with a claw trap, but it only has 40% of the battery life. That works kind of like a budget version of Lethal Pursuer, where you don't see the auras, but you can check your, iPad or whatever to see the general position of where the survivors are. Um, and because they're all being marked, you'll gain a lot of haste effect to be able to go and get to the survivors quickly to kind of start your pressure. You're not able to use that for setup because all four of your traps are being applied as claw traps, but you are able to start pressuring the survivors immediately based on their positioning from your tracking.
Yeah, I think that like synergizes really well if you wanted to run something like Corrupt on her, since she doesn't have the ability to set up her drones right away. You can kind of go more for getting into a chase a little bit, and then you can kind of also, once those expire, set up the drones near the other unblocked gens after, and then that allows you to at least get your first down pretty comfortably without them being kind of map wide, if that's something you wanted to do.
Yeah, for sure. And then the unquestionable iridescent king of information is the doctor. Uh, Doctor, his whole deal is like information, whether it is, applying the static blast to survivors initially, or, when they're in tier three, being able to hear them scream periodically. His base kit just gives you so much information on where survivors are all throughout. And even if, uh, you know, you run into the odd person who's running Calm Spirit, you can still tell that they get affected by madness based off of the HUD and seeing the portrait change with the different madness levels. Uh, you can get such good positioning of all of the survivors in a match. Uh, all the time, and his kit really leans heavily into that. Uh, you know, when I talked about the doctor build, I was talking about running whispers with it, um, and having just so much information on where the survivors are at any given period of time can let you see, if a survivor is in a locker, if you're being able to take a chase at a loop where they are. He has add-ons to be able to see the auras when they go up in madness tier levels. He is unquestionably the king of information for base kit.
Yeah, I think that like whispers is kind of like a staple, especially in pub matches, of just like getting consistent info. Like your static blast has a pretty long cooldown. Sure, there's add-ons and stuff that can let you regain it faster, but putting everyone up a full tier of madness is pretty strong. Like there are times later in a match when a lot of people will kind of be sitting at tier two and a half, right? Because it takes two of the regular blast to do a full tier of madness. So being able to put several survivors at once, thanks to whispers, into tier three where everyone has to snap out of it, can synergize super well with just kind of allowing you to go and chase and just applying slowdown and also getting people if they're trying to run around to scream and be able to continue tracking them, especially in mid chase. I think it's really nice if you ever kind of just look the wrong way and then but someone's been in tier 3 because you were just trying to hit them while looping with your shock, that it allows you to continue the chase and not lose track if you want to continue after them. He is very good at continuing to apply pressure and knowing where people are. He never really has to struggle with that, and stealth is sort of like not an option, which can really hamper a killer's ability for sure.
Yeah, and additionally, he has like the illusionary doctors. Uh, they will always show up facing a survivor within a particular range. So like you know where survivors are, even if you're not anywhere near them. If you have the add-on to be able to see illusory palettes, when a survivor runs through them, they'll disappear. So you can, if the white illusory palette goes away, then you know that a survivor has run through there. I mean, his kit just offers so much in terms of information, base kit, or especially when you throw in the various add-ons that you can do.
Yeah, the fake doctors and stuff that he can see and that detect survivors. It's kind of like a budget version of what Nemesis has with the zombies, except that you don't have to worry about a zombie seeing them. Those sort of pop up intermittently and stuff when they're affected by madness. So it can allow you, if you're ever down a static blast and you can't find someone to pressure somebody else and continue to find survivors. He never really has to worry about being out of chase for too long, which is a really strong characteristic for a killer for sure.
Yeah. Well, that'll do it for this episode. I really think that info perks, both on survivor side and killer side, are undervalued. I challenge anybody who watches this episode to just try out some of these. If you play survivor, try out Windows, try out, Bond. If you're playing killer, try out some of these add-ons. Try out, lethal pursuer is very heavily played, but try out surveillance, every now and then. Um, I think that the community largely gravitates towards second chance perks on survivor side and slowdown or regression on the killer side. But I think that info plays a very important role and it is very powerful.
Yeah, I think that you'll definitely find, especially for solo queue survivors, I think you'll be caught off guard a lot less if you're running stuff, and you'll know where to position. You'll know how to be a good teammate. You'll also prevent like your teammates from like there's definitely that frustration that will show up where sometimes teammates sort of run the killer to you. Being able to have that information ahead of time and while you're injured and stuff or healing is really nice, so you can kind of get out of the way. And for killer, even if there's, like you said, even if you're running lethal or some other information perk like nowhere to hide or something like that, changing it out for other perks, you might be surprised. I think we talked about a few that are really strong, but people are a little bit hesitant to use because they don't really see other people using them as much. But I think there's some really good options in there.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you everybody for watching. If you would like to follow me, you can find me on Twitch and Twitter at ScrapBrainSE2. Subtle, how can they follow you?
You can follow me on Twitch, Twitter, and on TikTok at ZSubtle. I've been posting again on TikTok and Twitter some clips and stuff, so you can find me there for sure.
Awesome. Well, normal YouTuber thing, smash that bell, whatever. But
Yeah.
thank you again for watching. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and yeah, just try out some info perks.
Yeah.
You can do great with them.
Yep.
They're very powerful.
But
All right.
thanks everyone. Later.
Bye.